For almost 70 years, a horrific event in American history was barely mentioned. It was left out of textbooks, classrooms, and public memory. In 1921, a thriving black community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was destroyed in one of the deadliest acts of racial violence in U.S. history. The Tulsa Massacre began on the evening of May 31, 1921. At the time, the city had a population of around 100,000 people. However, the destruction centered around a predominantly African-American area called the Greenwood District. In the end, 35 square blocks and around 1,200 homes were reduced to ashes. White mobs looted and burnt down businesses and systematically murdered African-American residents in cold blood.
We know that white members of the mob prevented doctors or ambulance crews from attending to black victims laying in the street. We know that some were repeatedly stabbed, wounded ones stabbed by whites with knives. There were drive-by shootings that happened during the night of May 31st, June 1st, where whites will pile into automobiles and go racing down streets in the black residential neighborhoods, firing into living rooms and children's bedrooms.
That's Scott Ellsworth, a historian and lecturer in the Department of Afro-American and African Studies at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. He's originally from Tulsa and has studied the Tulsa Race Massacre for several decades. He takes us back to 1921 to a neighborhood in Tulsa called Greenwood that was home to about 10,000 African Americans. It was a vibrant and fast-growing area that had a bustling commercial district filled with movie theaters, nice restaurants, and community buildings. For many, it was a great place to find a good job and lay down some roots. But beneath all of the economic prosperity and growth, tensions simmered. Ellsworth said that in 1907, state segregation laws stripped African Americans of the right to vote, serve on juries, or become police officers. White and African Americans still had entirely separate schools, living areas, and public buildings. Nationwide, groups like the Ku Klux Klan also continued to grow in membership.
It's important to remember that in 1915, the Ku Klux Klan had its second birth, its second iteration. And unlike the Klan of the 1860s and 1870s, this new World War I-era Klan was a national organization, and it wielded great power throughout the country. It ran the state government in New Jersey, in Oregon, and Indiana. The Klan was not simply anti-African American, it was also anti-Catholic, anti-Semitic as well, too. What we don't know for sure is whether the Klan was organized in Tulsa before the 1921 massacre or not. There were Klan-like groups in the city. There was one called the Knights of Liberty. We know that was there. We know when organizers for the Klan came to Oklahoma, but we're not exactly sure when the Klan took root. But after the massacre, they were gigantic.
So what sparked the all-out massacre in Tulsa? Ellsworth points to the events surrounding 19-year-old Dick Rowland, an African-American teen in Tulsa who worked as a shoe shiner. Rowland was accused of attempting to sexually assault a young white woman named Sarah Page. She was an elevator operator in a building, and he crossed paths with her on his way to use the colored bathroom on the top floor.
What we know happened is that Dick Rowland walked into the elevator, something happened, Sarah Page screamed, Dick Rowland ran out. And that's all we really know. What we think happened is that Dick Rowland tripped as he entered the elevator, stuck his hands out, might have grabbed Sarah Page's shoulder, knocked into her, perhaps her dress was torn. She screamed, and he took off. The police were summoned. 2 police officers show up. They don't seem to be particularly worried. They don't put out an all-points bulletin. They don't rush to go arrest Dick Rowland. They take a couple of statements, and they go about their business. But there was a clerk in the Renberg's clothing store in that building, a white clerk, who had heard the scream, saw Dick Rowland run out, and he concluded that Rowland had attempted to rape Page.
The next morning, Rowland was arrested and put in a jail cell on the top floor of the Tulsa courthouse. However, by the afternoon, Ellsworth says that the predominantly white newspaper at the time, the Tulsa Tribune, published a front-page story portraying Rowland as a stalker and rapist. The article riled up hundreds of people, and by early evening an angry mob had formed outside the courthouse, calling for the lynching of Rowland. But the new sheriff in town was determined to protect the teen.
In Greenwood, meanwhile, we have to remember this is before there were cell phones and computers, even radios didn't exist. So a lot of the news travels by word of mouth. Not that many people had telephones. But word hits Greenwood that Dick Rowland has been arrested, that he's in the jail, and that a lynch mob is forming. And an African-American vet jumped onto the stage at the Dreamland Theater, Black Theater, in Greenwood and said, "Shut this place down. We're not going to let this happen here."
In an effort to help out the sheriff, a group of African-American World War I vets traveled down to the courthouse, but their presence only added fuel to the fire. By nightfall, tensions were high, with hundreds of whites armed with guns, until a shot rang out at the city courthouse and violence erupted. By dawn, the mob arrived at the Greenwood district.
Any blacks who resist are killed. Others are basically arrested and taken away under armed guard to these various internment camps, which prevented them from being able to protect their homes. And so whites would break in, loot stores and homes and businesses, haul out whatever they wanted to, and then they would set them on fire. Perhaps the last death of the massacre, there was a man, we don't know his name. He was a double amputee African-American. We think he lived in a white neighborhood, actually. And he made his living selling pencils downtown and also singing songs and begging for tips. And so he shows up on June 1st, I think, not knowing that the massacre is going on. And a group of whites ended up dragging him to death behind an automobile right in downtown Tulsa.
By the afternoon of June 1st, it's estimated that somewhere between 70 to 300 people were dead, most of the victims being African American. The entire Greenwood community was destroyed, while the white mob went home. Meanwhile, a cover-up began to destroy photo evidence of the event and maintain the city's image.
The white city fathers told the world that white Tulsa is ashamed of this, that they'll rebuild the community. Instead, they tried to steal the land where the black commercial district was so they could build a new railroad station there. They were defeated in court by black lawyers, and black Tulsans rebuilt anyway, but they rebuilt themselves. A grand jury was impaneled, all white, of course, and not surprisingly, the grand jury came out and blamed African Americans for the riot. And so what happened is that no whites spent a single day in jail or prison for any of the murders, the looting, or the arson.
In the years after, white extremist groups like the Ku Klux Klan only grew their reach in Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma.
The Klan in Tulsa built its own impressive brick auditorium. It was a city where they had two chapters of the Women's Klan Auxiliary. It was also one of the few cities in the country that had a Children of the Ku Klux Klan chapter. They had large parades. They had a huge presence on the police force and in the city government as well, too. For nearly 50 years, Tulsa's white city newspapers, white daily newspapers, The World and the Tribune, simply would not write about the massacre and went to great lengths not to do so. Whites moving to Tulsa were told early on this is not something that you're supposed to talk about.
Ellsworth says that the suppression of photo evidence and newspaper stories helped keep the Tulsa Race Massacre out of public view for decades. Today, historians like Ellsworth are working to document the many narratives that were lost and spread awareness about this event and its lasting implications. To learn more about this story and our guest, Scott Ellsworth, head to viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written by Amirah Zaveri and originally aired in February 2021. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.